Beneath the shadow of the Great Pyramid lies a doorway to the underworld. This is the Osiris shaft, a tomb made for the Egyptian god of the dead himself.
16 meters behind the Sphinx, beneath Khafre's causeway, a shaft drops nearly 30 meters straight into Giza's bedrock. And it wasn't empty. According to research published by Egyptologist Zahi Hawass, the chamber below was flooded, eerily matching Herodotus's ancient account of a water-filled tomb near Cheops' pyramid. And here's the unsettling part. This is the only excavated structure that fits the story. What if we've never seen the underground mapped? How many more shafts are still buried beneath Giza? The tomb that shouldn't be there. Water sat at the bottom of the shaft for centuries, completely hidden beneath the Giza plateau, while people kept calling Herodotus a storyteller who exaggerated everything. But according to the ancient Greek historians' writings, there was supposed to be a mysterious underground tomb near the pyramid of Cheops, which we now call Khufu, surrounded by water and cut deep into the earth. Most historians treated it like mythology. Then archaeologists finally dug all the way down beneath Khafre's causeway, roughly 16 meters behind the Sphinx, and found something disturbingly close to what he described. Not just a chamber, either. A 3-level shaft descending nearly 30 meters into solid bedrock. And the deeper they went, the stranger it became. According to research published by Egyptian archaeologist Zahi Hawass through Guardian's Egypt, the lowest chamber contained water with a massive granite sarcophagus positioned at the center, almost exactly echoing Herodotus's account of a water-filled burial structure near the Great Pyramid. Britannica's coverage of the excavation also notes how the site became associated with Osiris, the Egyptian ruler of the underworld, after archaeologists uncovered symbolic features tied to funerary rituals and underground passageways. This wasn't some collapsed cave somebody randomly stumbled into. The Egyptians referred to the place as the House of Osiris, Lord of the Underground Tunnels, and suddenly that title starts sounding a lot less symbolic and a lot more literal. Here's where it gets uncomfortable. The shaft itself wasn't newly discovered. Parts of it had been known for decades beneath Khafre's causeway, but nobody fully connected it to Herodotus until the excavation reached the flooded lower levels. Think about that for a second. One of the most dismissed descriptions in ancient history only started looking credible after modern archaeologists physically uncovered the exact architectural pattern the story described. What if the exaggeration wasn't in Herodotus, but in the people who refused to look? And get this, the location matters. The shaft sits directly within the Giza complex, surrounded by monuments already associated with royal burials, ritual processions, and underground chambers. According to reporting summarized by Herodotus' review of the site and surrounding tunnel theories, the Osiris shaft has become part of a much larger argument over how extensive Giza's underground network might actually be. Public discussion usually treats it like one isolated anomaly, one weird flooded shaft beneath the plateau, but archaeologists have long known there are tunnels, cavities, and buried structures running beneath sections of Giza that tourists never see. That changes the way you hear Herodotus completely. Instead of reading his work like fantasy, you start reading it like fragmented field notes from somebody trying to describe a real place he didn't entirely understand. And honestly, how many travel accounts from the ancient world have we casually dismissed, only to discover they were describing something real in ways modern readers simply misinterpreted? By the time the excavation reached the deepest flooded chamber, the debate had already shifted. If this shaft really matches Herodotus's description, then why did it stay hidden for so long? And what happened when archaeologists finally tried to dig all the way down? the most difficult excavation ever done. The water kept coming back. Every time the pumps dragged another wave of muddy groundwater out of the shaft, more seeped through the stone again, and 30 meters below the Giza plateau, archaeologists were climbing through darkness so tight and humid that even reaching the lower chamber became a physical ordeal. According to Egyptian archaeologist Zahi Hawass, in research published through Guardians Egypt, the excavation of the Osiris shaft became one of the hardest projects his team had ever attempted. Not because of curses or mystery, but because the place fought them every step of the way. That detail changes the whole atmosphere around this site. People online love treating the Osiris shaft like some spooky underground secret hidden beneath the pyramids. But the reality was much messier and far more physical. Workers spent nearly 2 months pumping water out of the 3rd level alone, trying to stop the chamber from reflooding long enough to even see what was down there. Mud coated the floors. Dust filled the narrow passageways above. Access between levels was painfully limited because the shaft descends vertically through bedrock in 3 separate stages, each one opening into different chambers and side rooms carved deep beneath Khafre's causeway near the Sphinx. And here's where it gets interesting. The deeper they went, the more obvious it became that this wasn't just some ceremonial hole dug into the ground for symbolism. The infrastructure was deliberate. The 1st level contained chambers cut directly into the rock. The 2nd level revealed additional burial spaces and artifacts from later historical periods. But the 3rd level, the flooded one, completely changed the conversation. According to Britannica's documentation of the excavation, archaeologists eventually uncovered a subterranean hall where a water-filled moat surrounded a central stone platform. Sitting on top of that platform was a granite sarcophagus, isolated in the center like an island underground, except that the sarcophagus was empty. Think about how strange that actually is. You don't build a multi-level shaft descending 30 meters underground, manage water infiltration, carve chambers into bedrock, and position a massive sarcophagus in the middle of a flooded hall unless the location itself mattered. The emptiness almost makes it more unsettling because it suggests the chamber may have served a symbolic role tied to Osiris, ruler of the Egyptian underworld, rather than functioning as a normal burial tomb. That suddenly makes the phrase, House of Osiris, Lord of the Underground Tunnels, sound entirely different. According to reporting summarized by Pyramids Day, Tour and Headout's overview of the Giza underground theories, the Osiris shaft has become central to growing speculation about how extensive subterranean structures beneath the plateau might actually be. And honestly, once you understand the physical difficulty of excavating just this one shaft, the scale of the problem becomes obvious. What if the only reason we think this place is spooky is because we've never really confronted the logistical nightmare involved in properly mapping it? Because this wasn't archaeology with brushes and tourist photos. This was industrial pumping equipment, cramped descents into wet stone chambers, unstable footing, and constant battles against groundwater pressure beneath one of the most famous archaeological sites on Earth. And then another question starts creeping in. If one flooded shaft demanded 2 months of draining operations just to expose the lowest chamber, how many other buried structures beneath Giza might still be sitting untouched simply because excavating them would be brutally difficult? When the water finally cleared enough to reveal the lowest hall completely, archaeologists realized they weren't just looking at a strange underground chamber anymore. They were staring at evidence that Osiris worship at Giza may have been tied directly to a carefully engineered subterranean landscape, one that ancient builders understood far better than we do today. The moat, the sarcophagus, And the House of Osiris, at the very bottom of the shaft, beneath 30 meters of stone, mud, and groundwater, archaeologists stepped into a chamber that sounded less like a tomb and more like something pulled out of a religious vision. Water surrounded a raised stone platform in the center of the room, almost like a moat, and sitting on top of that platform was a massive granite sarcophagus, isolated in darkness underground. According to research published by Egyptian archaeologist Zahi Hawass through Guardians Egypt, this lower chamber of the Osiris shaft closely mirrors the ancient description written by Herodotus centuries ago about a water-filled burial structure near the pyramid of Cheops. And suddenly, his myth starts looking uncomfortably specific, because this wasn't just a flooded room. The architecture itself appears designed to create separation. You descend through narrow vertical passages, pass through multiple underground levels, and finally emerge into a hall where water physically isolates the central sarcophagus from the outer edges of the chamber. Britannica's documentation of the site describes the room as a subterranean hall cut directly into bedrock, with the stone coffin deliberately positioned at the center. That layout matters because Osiris, the Egyptian god associated with death and rebirth, wasn't simply ruler of the dead in an abstract spiritual sense. He was tied to the hidden world beneath the earth, the unseen passages below the surface, the realm people imagined as something navigable rather than symbolic. Then, archaeologists noticed another detail carved into the floor. The hieroglyphic symbol PR, meaning house, appeared as part of a larger phrase associated with the chamber. Pras NB Arstor, translated as the House of Osiris, Lord of the Underground Tunnels. Think about how specific that title actually is. Not Lord of the Afterlife, not Lord of Spirits, Lord of the Underground Tunnels. That changes the atmosphere around the pyramids completely. Most people grow up thinking of ancient Egyptian beliefs as entirely mystical, almost floating outside physical reality. But the Osiris shaft suggests something much stranger. According to the archaeological interpretation summarized through Guardians Egypt and Herodotus' review of the site, the Egyptians may have visualized parts of the underworld as literal subterranean spaces connected to sacred geography beneath Giza itself. The water circling the sarcophagus wasn't random decoration. It may have represented the primeval waters tied to rebirth and transition into the next world, turning the chamber into a ritual stage rather than a conventional burial site. And here's the detail that keeps pulling researchers back into debate. The granite sarcophagus was empty. No royal mummy, no sealed remains, no obvious burial. That emptiness forces a different interpretation because the chamber suddenly looks less like a hidden grave and more like a ceremonial environment built to represent Osiris's domain underground. What if the House of Osiris, Lord of the Underground Tunnels, wasn't poetic language at all, but an actual description of how Egyptians mapped sacred underground spaces beneath the plateau? Once you start seeing the shaft that way, the implications get bigger fast. The pyramids stop looking like isolated monuments sitting on the desert surface and start looking more like anchors connected to a much larger subterranean landscape. And if this shaft was explicitly called the House of Osiris, Lord of the Underground Tunnels, then what kinds of rituals took place here? And why is there a strange, black substance smeared over the sarcophagi, the ritual pit, where time overlapped? The bones didn't belong to the same era as the pottery. That's the detail that makes the Osiris shaft feel less like a tomb frozen in time and more like a place that stayed alive underground for centuries. According to excavation reports published by Egyptian archaeologist Zahi Hawass through Guardian's Egypt, archaeologists found pottery dating back to Egypt's 6th dynasty deep within the 3rd level of the shaft, while the 2nd level contained late-period sarcophagi, skeletons, and burial materials added much later. In other words, people kept returning here generation after generation, descending into the same underground chambers long after the original structure already existed. And honestly, that changes everything. Most people imagine ancient tombs as sealed environments. Somebody dies, priests perform rituals, the chamber closes forever, and history freezes in place. But the Osiris shaft doesn't behave like that at all. It behaves more like a ritual site that evolved over time, almost like an underground religious stage reused by entirely different groups separated by centuries. The deeper archaeologists dug, the more the timeline blurred together. Then there was the black substance. Researchers examining the 2nd-level sarcophagi discovered traces of a dark coating smeared across parts of the stone coffins and burial materials. According to the analysis discussed in the University of Montana thesis by researcher Nick Whiting, and referenced alongside studies of Osiris-related burials, substances like this black goo were often associated with ritual transformation, rebirth symbolism, resin mixtures, oils, or decomposition products tied to funerary ceremonies connected with Osiris worship. That sounds strange at first until you remember what Osiris represented: death, resurrection, transition, movement between worlds. Suddenly, the black coating stops feeling accidental. Here's where it gets weirder. The shaft's different levels weren't abandoned after each phase of use. They were adapted, reinterpreted, re-entered by later Egyptians who clearly still considered the place sacred. Ancient Code's detailed review of the Osiris shaft highlights how the structure contains archaeological layers from entirely different periods stacked within the same underground environment, almost like multiple civilizations inside one vertical corridor beneath Giza. Think about what that means for a second. A worshipper descending into the shaft during the late period would have entered a space already ancient by their standards, already wrapped in stories, already tied to Osiris and the underworld. They weren't creating a new sacred site, they were inheriting one. And because Egyptian religion placed enormous emphasis on continuity, rebirth, and cyclical renewal, the shaft itself may have functioned as a living ritual environment where older layers remained spiritually active rather than obsolete. That's the part modern audiences often miss. The Egyptians didn't necessarily see the underworld as a closed destination somewhere beyond reality. The Osiris shaft suggests they imagined it as something physically connected to the landscape around them, a sacred subterranean zone people could symbolically enter through specific locations beneath the earth, which makes the layering inside this shaft incredibly important. The 6th dynasty pottery at the bottom, the later burials above it, the black ritual substances coating sarcophagi centuries afterwards, all of it points toward continuity rather than interruption. What if the black goo wasn't simply residue from decay, but part of a ritual language repeated across generations, trying to maintain a connection with the same underground sacred space? And once that idea settles in, the implications spread far beyond one shaft beneath Khafre's causeway. Because if this structure became a ritual layer cake reused over hundreds of years, how many other buried chambers beneath Giza might contain the same overlapping history waiting beneath the sand? The 648-meter shafts. It starts with a radar image that looks almost too clean to be real. lines dropping straight down beneath Khafre's pyramid, geometric shapes stacked like they were drawn on purpose, and suddenly the internet is calling it a hidden city, a vast underground network stretching hundreds of meters into the limestone. According to media summaries compiled in Headout, Lost City Beneath Giza, synthetic aperture radar interpretations from 2025 suggested 5 tiered structures, 8 vertical shafts reaching as deep as 648 meters, and even cube-like chambers buried far below the plateau. And then the story explodes. Social media picks it up immediately. Rendered visuals start circulating, showing glowing underground towers and impossible corridors, often mapped directly under Giza, as if the entire plateau is just a lid hiding something massive underneath. Some of those visuals even borrow the silhouette of the Osiris shaft, stretching it downward into speculative depth, turning one real excavation into a template for everything imagined below it. But here's where things get uncomfortable, and honestly more interesting. Because while those radar interpretations sound dramatic, the physical reality on the ground is very different. Technical analysis published on SSRN by independent researchers reviewing SAR and subsurface imaging data warns that dense limestone formations, natural fissures, and signal scattering can produce geometric illusions that resemble chambers or shafts where none exist. In other words, radar doesn't see stone the way we imagine it does. It interprets density changes, and in a place like Giza, layered with tombs, fractures, and moisture variation, that signal can easily become misleading. And get this, that skepticism isn't fringe. Reports from Euronews, Hidden City Debate Giza, and Turkey Today, Radar Technology Giza highlight how Egyptologists, including Zahi Hawass, have repeatedly pushed back on the idea of a confirmed underground city, stressing that most of these features are interpretations, not excavated facts. Some are already known structures. Others may simply be artifacts of the imaging process. Now contrast that with the Osiris shaft. 30 meters down under Khafre's causeway, physically excavated, pumped, drained, mapped by hand and machinery over months, not inferred through radar shadows. According to Hawass's excavation documentation published through Guardian's Egypt, Osiris shaft, it is a 3-level vertical structure carved directly into bedrock, with a flooded lower chamber, a central sarcophagus, and ritual inscriptions linking it to Osiris as Lord of the underground tunnels. And that phrase matters more than it first appears, because unlike the 648-meter shafts that exist only in renderings and signal interpretations, the Osiris shaft is physically verified. You can stand above it. You can descend into it. You can see the water, the stone platform, the empty sarcophagus sitting in the middle of a flooded chamber that matches, in eerie detail, Herodotus' description of a water-filled tomb near Cheops pyramid, as explained in Britannica's Archaeological Overview, Britannica Osiris shaft. So now the contrast becomes unavoidable. On one side, a single shaft that has been excavated, drained, documented, tied to ancient texts, and physically confirmed as real. On the other hand, a sprawling vision of megastructures reaching 648 meters underground, generated from radar data that even its own supporters admit requires interpretation and caution. And here's the real tension. What if both stories are true in completely different ways? What if the Osiris shaft is the only ground truth anchor we actually have, a rare case where myth, archaeology, and physical excavation overlap cleanly? while everything deeper, larger, and more geometric is still sitting in the uncertain space between data and imagination. Because once you remove the hype, the story doesn't collapse. It becomes sharper. One shaft that proves Herodotus wasn't just inventing things. One shaft that shows Osiris worship wasn't abstract mythology, but physically anchored underground practice. And a whole landscape of radar claims that may or may not survive contact with real excavation. And that's where the question hits hardest. What if the 648-meter narrative tells us less about what's under Giza and more about how badly we want a hidden city to exist? And if the Osiris shaft is the only structure we've fully confirmed, how many more real shafts are still buried under the plateau, waiting for the same kind of excavation, pumping and mapping that finally revealed this one? That's all about the mystery beneath Egypt's Osiris shaft is stranger than we thought. It's truly disturbing. We would like to know if there is anything we might have missed from this discovery. And until next time, ciao.